international organization dedicated to building a resilient world for all. Welcome to this Climate Vulnerable Forums Leaders event. And what an event. We have an absolute extraordinary set of leaders on a topic of vital importance for the world today. I am joining you live from Rotterdam in the Netherlands, the headquarters of the new GCA, and I'm overlooking the harbor where only a few days ago, our future office, the world's largest ever floating office, was towed into place. It is, I believe, a symbol for two realities that confront the world today. One, the fast-changing climate that has fundamentally altered the world around us already. And two, as we mobilize to address the causes of climate change, we must already adapt our lives and society and the world we live in. I'm extremely honored to moderate this event presided over by Her Excellency Sheikh Hasina, the Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh. And Honorable Prime Minister, just last month, I was proud to join you for launching the South Asia program of the GCA and our office in Dhaka. Your region will be instrumental in defining and inspiring the world to rise to the challenges of a hotter planet. Now, our event today has a very specific focus. We're here to talk about the urgency for all nations to upgrade the ambitions of their climate efforts during this pandemic-affected year of 2020. What do we know? NDCs, or nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement, are the core country targets for climate action to 2030. We have all agreed that all nations will update and upgrade their NDCs and targets before the end of the year. Not in 2 years, not in 4 years, this year. The next collective deadline to raise ambition is in 2025. Considered by many as far too late for keeping within the 1.5 degrees target. The CVF has been championing this goal since it was founded in 2009. We're here today in a virtual format, which now is the format which we work on in the world. But the CVF was also the first ever to do so among world leaders with its virtual summit in 2018. The outcome of that summit committed CVF members to enhance their NDCs in 2020 as a way to push other countries into action. Of course, while assuming the presence of robust international partnership to deliver ambition. Building on this, let me briefly pause now to introduce a short video on the forum.
The Climate Vulnerable Forum, the CVF, is an international partnership of 48 developing countries and 1.2 billion people that are highly vulnerable to a warming planet. The forum serves as a South-South cooperation platform to safeguard the 1.5-degree goal by enhancing the urgency for global ambition for concrete climate adaptation and mitigation action for vulnerable countries and communities.
So let us proceed with our program today, Your Excellencies. We will first hear from the Honorable Chair, 3 keynote speakers. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, the Chair of the Board of the Global Center on Adaptation, or the GCA, His Excellency Ban Ki-moon, and the Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, my good friend Patricia Espinosa. Following these statements, we will hear from leaders across the CVF nations, starting, of course, with the Troika leadership, and then we're going to move around the world. Serving as a breakout to our Tour de Monde, as moderated by His Excellency Dr. Momen, the Honorable Foreign Minister of Bangladesh. He will introduce you to all the 5 distinguished ambassadors that have recently been appointed by the CVF to represent the forum on key topics of interest. So let's get moving. Allow me to turn the meeting over to our chair, Your Excellency, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. This is your second tenure chairing the Climate Vulnerable Forum for Bangladesh. For over a decade, you bring extraordinary leadership to the global movement for tackling this unique crisis from the front lines. Please, the Honorable Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Bismillah. Bismillah Rahman Rahim. His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, His Excellency Ban Ki-moon, Chair of the Global Center on Adaptation, heads of states and governments of the CVA, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum and very good evening to you all. Today, we are the most important crossroad of human history, facing the gravest global challenges of our time. Adverse impacts of climate change are harming our civilization, destroying our planet, and threatening our very existence. We, the CVF leaders and our partners, call everyone to take urgent and strong global actions to address climate emergency before the 2020 NDC enhancement deadline. Bangladesh is honored to be chosen to lead the Climate Vulnerable Forum for the second time. The CVF represents over 1 billion people of the world's most vulnerable countries. CVF countries suffer the most despite their insignificant contribution to the global carbon emission. As President, our focus would be galvanizing support for the goal to keep the global temperature increase up to 1.5 degrees, accelerating financing mechanisms and highlighting the narratives of climate resilience and loss and damage issue. We will also put emphasis on appointing an UN special rapporteur on climate change and creating a CVF and B20 joint multi-donor fund. Bangladesh launched the South Asian Regional Office for Global Center of Adaptation in Dhaka on 8 September. It will act as Secretariat for Bangladesh Presidency and facilitate, support and develop appropriate actions in South Asia to enhance climate resiliency in the region. According to the Climate Change Vulnerability Index 2019 of German Watch, Bangladesh is the 7th most affected countries of the world due to the adverse impacts of climate change. My country is facing recurrent flooding this monsoon causing immense damage to crops and displacing huge people. The impact of super cyclone Amphan in the last May, along with current COVID-19 pandemic, aggravated the situation. The 1.1 million Rohingya refugees from Myanmar given shelter at Cox's Bazar are also causing serious social and environmental damages. In Bangladesh, we have been implementing various mitigation and adaptation programs to combat the climate-induced disasters. My government has so far allocated $430 million from its own resources under Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund since 2009. Millions of tree saplings are being planted every year across the country. Our scientists have developed saline, flood, and drought resistant crops and floating agriculture technology. My government has been spending on an average $2 billion, 1% of our GDP per year since 2010 for adaptation purposes. This year, we are celebrating the birth centenary of the father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who recognized the threats of natural calamities and took initiatives to protect our people. We have decided to launch a program to develop National Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan to help mobilize resources for the implementation of a new pathway to secure our future. I'm happy that many other CVF countries are also managing climate change impacts efficiently. Costa Rica produces 100% renewable electricity for most of the year. In Ethiopia, 4 billion tree seedlings were planted last year and 20 billion will be planted by 2024. However, despite individual efforts, the robust international partnership remains indispensable for the climate vulnerable countries to minimize the profound loss and damage. The world is at the edge of the cliff of surpassing the Paris Agreement's 1.5 degrees centigrade limit. This is a clear point of no return. And from the G20 countries, which account for more than 3/4 of global emissions, we expect clear and definite NDC for effective reduction of their emissions. If the current trend of sea level rise is continuing, most of the islands and coastal countries will go underwater, making millions of people climate refugees. The world does not have the capacity to shelter these refugees. Realizing this, Bangladesh Parliament declared a planetary emergency and called on the world to work on a war footing to stop climate change following COP26 postponement. The decisive hour falls at midnight on December the 31st this year when we declare our extended NDCs. This is particularly our survival deadline. On behalf of CVF, we launched today the CVF Midnight Survival Deadline for the Climate Initiative to urge every leader of every nation to show leadership now, convening alongside the UNGA. We also declare our call for an international day to be named Climate Resilience Day to secure our harmony with the Mother Earth. We should also ensure that at least $100 billion a year are available to developing countries for mitigation, adaptation, disaster response, and recovery. In the end, I would like to say, first, strict implementation of Paris Agreement is the only way to slow down the current rate of damage caused by climate change. Second, the governments should not only honor their national contributions under the Paris Agreement, they also need to substantially increase their ambitions The idea of climate justice must be established for the sake of climate and the planet. The third, more vigorous provision of finance must be ensured by the major economies, MDGs, and IFIs, along with access to technology. Fourth, take bold action to address and mainstream the issue of loss and damage. Excellencies, in our war against nature, we will only lose. All our actions manifest that we are consciously destroying the very support systems that are keeping us alive. So, the time to take action to save the planet is not tomorrow, but today. Thank you all again.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister. What a powerful vision and what inspirational leadership you're showing in championing the cause and aspirations of the climate vulnerable nations. So thank you. As managing partner and secretariat of the CVF, we at the GCA are extremely humbled and proud, supporting you all the way, Honorable Prime Minister, in these endeavors. Strong call to action, strong moral leadership, action from the front lines. Let's turn to our next distinguished speaker. Mr. Antonio Guterres is the Secretary General of the United Nations, at the heart of the international community's struggle to grapple with the tandem COVID-19 pandemic and climate crisis that are gripping the planet. So, Mr. Secretary General, what is your message for our leaders event today?
The COVID-19 crisis has shown that we are all vulnerable. The same is true of climate disruption. Both crises have inflicted huge human and economic costs. Both can only be addressed through ambitious multilateral action. That is why I'm urging governments to take 6 climate-positive actions to recover better together. Invest in green jobs, do not bail out polluting industries, especially coal, end fossil fuel subsidies and place a price on carbon, take climate risks into account in all financial and policy decisions, work together, and most important, leave no one behind. All countries are threatened by climate change, but some are more vulnerable than others. That is why we must limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees and transition to climate-resilient economies. The United Nations is committed to ensuring ambitious climate action consistent with the goals of the Paris Agreement. I've been pushing, with the help of Jamaica, Canada, and others, a sustainable COVID-19 recovery through the Finance for Development process that will address climate priorities. Vulnerable nations need support. Developed countries must respect their commitment to the developing world to mobilize $100 billion per year from public and private sources. Support for adaptation and resilience is as necessary as mitigation and should be funded equally by multilateral development banks and the Green Climate Fund. Climate vulnerable countries are already leaders on climate ambition. You have been among the first to submit more ambitious nationally determined contributions ahead of COP26. I applaud your moral leadership and concrete examples. They are crucial to push the big emitters to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. You can count on the United Nations to support your ambition.
So thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for highlighting specific areas where governments can take bold action to take both climate and pandemic crisis during this extraordinary period. Thank you also for recognizing the ambitious efforts of the climate vulnerable countries themselves and for pledging the support of the UN for their work. Let us now move on with our event and our next speaker, His Excellency Ban Ki-moon. The Paris Agreement and the first set of NDCs in 2015 was forged under your leadership. You are now chairing our Global Center on Adaptation's board. You, Mr. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, are acutely aware of the development and humanitarian challenges faced by vulnerable countries. What is your message today to this forum? The floor is yours, sir.
Excellencies, Your Excellency, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, Chair of the CVF Climate Vulnerable Forum, Honorable Heads of State and Government of the CVF, Honorable Ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be joining you today. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, you have been a long-standing champion of climate action and the cause of the most vulnerable. And I congratulate you on continuing this journey in presiding this forum once again. Just before I joined your 2011 Dhaka CVF meeting, I had traveled to another CVF member, Kiribati, where I had an extremely eye-opening experience. At the time, the islands were experiencing very high tides, and because we were so close to sea level, we were provided with life vests as a precaution overnight. I will never forget it. The decade since this time, a lot has changed. In 2015, we saw the world truly come together to create a single peace pact with the planet. The Paris Climate Change Agreement gives world leaders direction and clarity. It gives them specific, measurable goals, their own nationally determined contributions, NDCs, with a clear roadmap to achieve these. We now need to redouble our efforts before we pass the point of no return. The evidence for this is clear. According to NASA, 2010 to 2019 was the hottest decade ever on record. According to UN Environment Program, UNEP, the current climate targets based on the 2015 Paris Climate Change Agreement, NDCs would lead to global warming of about 3 degrees Celsius. Allow me to be very blunt. Dhaka and many more cities like it across the CVF countries and around the world may simply cease to exist in a 3-degree world. Even during a pandemic, the vulnerable continue to face the same challenges they have always had. On the front lines, the fact that they shoulder the heaviest cost when they have done the least to cause the climate emergency is a stain on our collective morals. We owe it to those who are already suffering to show progress and to do it with urgency. We know the massive impacts of the surpassing 1.5 degrees of warming versus only 2 degrees increased the incidence of drought, forest fires, floods, and storms. If sea levels were to rise by just 1 meter, 17% of Bangladesh would be underwater by 2050. So we have to keep striving for 1.5. UNEP, though, indicates that global emissions need to be cut by 7.6% each year between now and 2030 to keep the 1.5 within reach. Action cannot wait. We cannot possibly build back better without doing more on climate. 2020 is the year for action. Action is happening. China's new ambition for a revised Paris NDC to peak emissions before 2030 shows extraordinary leadership. Progress is underway in the European Union for a stronger NDC. Today's launch of this CVF Midnight Survival Initiative for the Climate is critical. Materializing new and more ambitious NDCs this year is indeed a matter of the survival for the most vulnerable. I urge all leaders and all nations to heed the call for delivering new and more ambitious Paris NDCs in 2020. If the poor and the most vulnerable are acting, so can any nation. As the chair of the board of the Global Center on Adaptation, GCA, and the managing partner for CVF, I want to also emphasize that revising NDCs is also an opportunity to accelerate adaptation action. Climate change doesn't wait. We must focus on helping affected communities right now. We all need to become more resilient, to prepare and respond to the disruptive effects of climate change, to learn how to protect lives and livelihoods using practical and positive solutions to create and maintain a sustainable existence. That is the purpose of the Global Center on Adaptation. The 25 January 2021 Climate Adaptation Summit, hosted by the Netherlands and supported by GCA, will also be a critical moment to launch a decade of transformational action to help society prepare and adjust to the changes ahead. Let us work together to find solutions so we can all thrive in our changing world. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency Ban Ki-moon, for those inspiring words, extraordinary leadership, and also your strong collaboration with the Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Your urging of all nations to upgrade their NDCs and join in the CVF Midnight Initiative being launched here today will no doubt resonate across the international community. Thank you also for recalling the very crucial January 2021 Climate Adaptation Summit hosted by Prime Minister Rutte. In aiming to launch a decade of transformational action to build a climate resilient world, that first ever Leaders Summit on climate adaptations is indeed a major event on the international calendar, including in supporting the delivery of bold adaptation action across the coming decade. Now, let me turn to the head of the UNFCCC Secretariat, Patricia Espinosa. Patricia, you have supported the work of the international community following the Paris Agreement. We are approaching the culmination point of 5 years of work under your leadership. Yet, if I may say so, it seems the world's ambition has largely frozen in time since the first NDCs were put forward in 2015. Obviously, there has been a huge disruption of the pandemic, the moving of COP26 to 2021, but also, on the positive side, the pledging from a broad group of stakeholders that climate action cannot wait, and new signs now of momentum that could make 2020 a game-changing year. Patricia, what do you have? What's your message to this forum for the world? And how do you view the importance of the CVF's Midnight Initiative? Patricia? We may have disconnected from Bonn, and given we need to adapt in this forum ourselves, we may get back to Patricia anytime soon. But let us now turn to the leaders of the Climate Vulnerable Forum for their messages to the world. starting with the CVF Troika, the leadership group that works closely with this forum's presidency to advance the priorities of climate vulnerable nations. President David Kabua, you're president of the Marshall Islands. Recently, you handed over the chair of the CVF to the Honorable Prime Minister in Bangladesh. As an atoll nation, with your entire country close to mean sea level, I visited Majuro last year. When you stand in the center of your capital, the ocean on both sides, much of the land flooded, it's one of the most extraordinary viewpoints of how vulnerable a community can become to this climate crisis. President Kabua, what is your message to the world, sir?
Gentlemen, warm Yahweh and greetings from the Republic of the Marshall Islands. I am very pleased to join you all today in this important event of the Climate Vulnerable Forum. The RMI acknowledges the leadership of Bangladesh and Her Excellency Sheikh Hasina, the CVF chair. We stand by you in the CVF Troika and the most vulnerable nations of our forum in this effort to appeal to all countries for stronger climate commitments during this health and climate crisis this year. Climate change is the greatest threat to the peace and security of the Marshall Islands. Our livelihoods have already been disrupted by long periods of drought and rising sea levels that inundate our homes, vegetations, and water sources. If we continue to allow the global temperatures to rise, our islands will become uninhabitable and we will be forced to relocate. But where would we go? The Marshall Islands has no higher ground for retreat. We consist of atolls, so narrow you can often stand in the lagoon and see the ocean wave crash on the other side. The impacts are already felt today in king tides that bring floods to most of our dry land each year, the growing power of typhoons and salt water from once clear wells contaminated by the rising ocean. And they are worsening, not just in our population, but around the world. Communities are all facing serious challenges, and it is an essential point of humanity that none of us is spared in our suffering. Today, we are faced with an unprecedented crisis that is an added challenge. The RMI is fortunate enough to remain COVID-free, and we extend our condolences to those affected by this pandemic and our words of strength and support. RMI is still affected economically and financially by the crisis. I see the pandemic as a testament of our ability as humans to adapt and to also give us the opportunity to build back better. Better, though, is an empty promise unless we put the fight against climate change within the response and recovery. As challenging as that is, we cannot delay. To keep the 1.5 degrees goal at the heart of the Paris Agreement alive and save our future, every day may well count. The solution is clear. Build your new climate ambition and NDCs into your response and recovery plans. Midnight on the 31st of December 2020 is our survival deadline. The next international deadline for new national climate commitments in 2025 would be too late. So we call on the international community to step up and raise their ambition by submitting newer national contributions or NDCs under the Paris Agreement this year before the end of 2020. Do not miss this opportunity to save our future and rebuild a better, greener world for us all. Moldada.
Thank you so much, Mr. President Kabua. We appreciate your strong voice from the real front line of this crisis. There is no time to waste, as you said, and I'm sure we'll also take great note of your recommendation that we need to embed new climate ambition in our recovery plans. Let us try to go back to Bonn, to Patricia Espinosa. Patricia, you've heard the call for leaders already so far. We need enhanced NDCs, more ambition this year. What is your message to the forum, Patricia, to the world, and how do you see this particular initiative being launched today? Patricia?
Thank you very much, Patrick, and good afternoon. And thank you, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Thank you very much for your leadership, and also to the Global Center on Adaptation and the Secretariat of the Climate Vulnerable Forum for putting together this initiative, this meeting today. And thank you to all the high-level representatives, the heads of state and other high-level representatives that are participating here. Since 2016, the forum has called for ambitious NDCs to maintain the 1.5% goal that we fought for in Paris. And actually, you did a great job there. But the forum's efforts didn't stop there and have continued through its 2018 virtual summit and the Madrid Ambition Drive for Survival initiative during COP25. Likewise, we welcome and support the launch of your Midnight Survival Deadline initiative for the climate. Despite significant obstacles in this challenging year, parties must retain, as we have heard today, focus on the urgent need to honor their climate commitments and continue building ambition. COVID-19 is changing lives, economies, and businesses globally, but it has not changed our climate emergency. This year's land and sea temperatures are the second highest on record. August also marked the 428th consecutive month with temperatures above the 20th century average. Some saw a silver lining when emissions in early 2020 were significantly down, but they are rising again. Instead, hope lies elsewhere, that the convergence of these two global crises opens a window of opportunity, not only to recover from a virus, but to build forward, to build cities and communities that are green, healthy, and prosperous for all. In this, the 25th anniversary of the United Nations, we all are reminded we already have the international multilateral framework in place to address these challenges and more. It produced the 2015 Paris Agreement and 2030 Agenda, clear plans with specific deadlines and obligations. But the power of these plans will not be unleashed unless commitments under them are fulfilled, and they have yet to be. Meanwhile, close to 1.5 billion of the world's most vulnerable people live precariously on the front lines of a worsening global climate crisis. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the climate regime exists on the basis of trust. Trust that promises are made are promises delivered. Trust that support from industrialized nations is not charity, but collective self-interest. And trust that nations will continue to increase ambition over time and outline those plans boldly and unequivocally in nationally determined contributions. At UN Climate Change, we've never wavered in our message that enhanced NDCs are due in 2020. Perhaps if we had more time, we would have more flexibility, but the luxury of time was squandered long ago. We are now minutes to midnight. Momentum, however, is picking up. About a dozen nations have already submitted an enhanced NDCs, and many others have already indicated that they will take steps to submit before the end of the year. We also know that the European Union is working on adopting a new emission reduction target, and China is showing its leadership with respect to climate action as well. This year's deadline is vital. The next submission date for NDCs is 5 years away, at which point our window of opportunity may be closed. The deadline is also important because only the countries submitting revised NDCs by December 31st, 2020 will be included in February's synthesis report. I outlined this in a letter to parties in August. 2020 is important for another reason. advancing adaptation efforts. Under the Paris Agreement, countries must plan and implement their adaptation efforts. National adaptation plans are designed for this purpose. They are the only international adaptation process with comprehensive guidelines and with a funding mandate from the Green Climate Fund. To demonstrate that adaptation is not being left behind this year, countries must finalize their plans by the end of 2020. Parties can also include adaptation in their NDCs as well. So not only is it an opportunity to increase the visibility of adaptation efforts, but to show to the international community that work is being done to build a more resilient world. Excellencies, the Paris Agreement is a covenant of hope with the people of the world. We call upon all parties to fulfill their commitments under it and to submit enhanced NDCs by the end of 2020. I would once again like to thank the Climate Vulnerable Forum for not only echoing this call, but launching this initiative that will help us achieve our collective goals. And I'm very glad to see all of you here today and to see that you are good and safe. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Well, thank you so much, Patricia, for your strong support to the CVF over all these years. Also for your message of hope that hopefully the global crisis on COVID and the crisis on climate can converge and that the world can turn into a better place. You mentioned trust. You can trust that the CVF will deliver what it has promised to deliver. But trust is mutual. What we also hope for is that the trust of delivery of the other partners outside the CVF will deliver on their part. And we count on your leadership indeed to get this message out. So wonderful. Thank you again, Patricia, and all the best for now. Let us turn now to the rest of our program, to Ethiopia first, and after that to Barbados. Your Excellency Sahle-Work Zedde, the Honorable President of Ethiopia. It's great to see you again. We really appreciated your leadership at the recent launch of GCA Africa, which followed the launch of GCA Bangladesh. Ethiopia was also president of the CVF prior to the Marshall Islands and Bangladesh. And as such, you're obviously part of the Troika leadership group. You have among the most ambitious green growth strategies in the world. And you already have suffered unimaginable climate impacts. Madam President, what is your message to the international community today?
Gentlemen, it's indeed a great pleasure to join you today in this critical and urgent virtual Climate Vulnerable Forum Leaders event. Let me take this opportunity to congratulate you, Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, for assuming the presidency of the Climate Vulnerable Forum for the second time. Ethiopia, as a member of the Forum Troika, would like to recognize the leadership of your country, particularly at this time when the world is being confronted by unprecedented challenges due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's obvious that members of the Forum have been experiencing the adverse impacts of climate change in various forms, ranging from flooding, as it is the case currently in my country, and severe droughts to devastating storms, all creating irreversible loss and damage. As a matter of fact, we bear the brunt of climate change as we have extremely limited capacities to respond to those challenges. This is compounded by the fact that our economic activities are highly dependent on climate-sensitive sectors, including agriculture and ecotourism. To make matters worse, the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic has put our most vulnerable CVF countries and its peoples under the severe social and economic pressures, as we have weak national health systems and rely heavily on subsistence economies. In doing so, the pandemic has not only exacerbated existing challenges we've been bearing as a result of climate change and other peculiar developmental challenges such as poverty, conflict, and instability, but also threaten to reverse the significant economic and developmental gains we have recorded over the past few years. In light of this fact, the recovery mechanisms from the shocks of COVID-19 must be aligned with the Paris Agreement of climate change and relevant sustainable development goals. Parties should leverage the existing opportunities to ensure that the recovery mechanism follows a green and resilient path. In this regard, the submission of the nationally determined contributions by parties to the Paris Agreement before the end of December 2020 can be considered as a critical moment for raising ambitious as well as ensuring a green recovery from COVID. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, time is not on our side. Countries need to ambitiously respond to the survival deadline for the humankind, which is December 2020. It marks a crucial deadline for responding to the gravity of the situations faced by more than 1 billion most vulnerable people living on the front line of a worsening climate crisis in CVF countries. It also epitomizes our only chance to keep the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal of the Paris Agreement within reach. As a member of the CVF Troika, I would like to call upon all parties to the Paris Agreement to submit their revised or updated NDC before the survival deadline, if late by midnight of the 31st December 2020. Parties should also harness this opportunity to strengthen the adaptation components of their to-be-updated NDCs. Moreover, as the pandemic is exacerbating the already precarious situations in most vulnerable countries, the developed countries must enhance their climate finance and technology transfer supports. At this juncture, I would like to underscore the importance of pursuing bold climate actions, both at national and global levels, alongside the ongoing concerted global efforts to mitigate the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Addressing the effects of the pandemic should not be a reason for not submitting ambitious NDCs. Both challenges, climate change and COVID-19, could be addressed in a green recovery way. Besides, delayed response is going to be expensive and irreversible. My country has been at the forefront of the fight against climate change. Globally, we've been leaders in the international climate diplomacy arenas, as clearly demonstrated during our leadership at the meeting of the Committee of African Heads of State and Government on Climate Change, the Least Developed Countries, and the Climate Vulnerable Forum. At the national level, Ethiopia has taken an exemplary leadership role by launching its climate resilient green economy strategy in 2011, prior to the Paris Call. This strategy is a blueprint for pursuing its ambitious aspiration to build a carbon neutral and resilient economy. What has been done over the past 9 years reveals that Ethiopia has achieved remarkable outcomes in its endeavor to build a green and resilient economy through putting in place appropriate national and sectoral policy framework and institutional setups to undertake practical actions at the grassroots level. The process of its implementation has moved from a project-based approach to being fully mainstreamed into the national development plan, with the government allocating a significant amount of national resources for both climate mitigation and adaptation intervention. It is among the 6 pillars of our 10 years perspective plan, which runs from 2020 to 2030. Besides, we've been embarked on implementing our various national climate action plans in a COVID response way. In the just concluded Ethiopian rainy season, we have managed to plant more than 5 billion tree seedlings under the national flagship program called the Green Legacy Initiative. Designed by the overarching goal to pursue sustainable development by reducing poverty, conserving biodiversity, and promoting climate change adaptation and build the resilience of the community, the initiative has a target of planting 20 billion tree seedlings until 2022. Next year, the Green Legacy is planned to expand to neighboring countries. Currently, despite the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, we're in the process of further enhancing our first nationally determined contribution, which was submitted to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, in 2015. Alongside this, we are pursuing the endeavor of preparing the 2050 long-term low-carbon development strategy in accordance with the Paris Agreement. As I conclude, I would like to reiterate the unwavering commitment of my country in the global fight against climate change, among others, by submitting its enhanced nationally determined contribution. Let me take this opportunity to once again call upon all parties to the Paris Agreement to submit their most ambitious NDCs before December 2020, so that we do not miss a small window of opportunity we have to limit the global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius. I thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Madam President. And I mean, your message is heard loud and clear. Time is not on our side. We need bold action. It's very clear that those who did the least to contribute to the climate problem, such as those in Ethiopia and many other CVF member states, are suffering the most. And you're not waiting for the international community to step up ambition. No, you put your first foot forward. But we need the international community to do the same before the end of the year. Let us now turn to Her Excellency Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, for her message to our forum. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for the invitation to address this leaders' event of the Climate Vulnerable Forum. Barbados pledges its full support to your chairmanship. Since 2009, this forum has brought together developing countries which, because of their vulnerability, share the same sense of urgency to address the climate crisis. Along with the Maldives, Barbados was a founding member of this forum, and we are still committed to its principles. Madam Chair, Barbados continues to play its part. My government intends to have a fossil fuel-free domestic economy by 2030 at best, or carbon neutral at worst. Following on our high per capita ratio of solar water heaters, we already have one of the highest penetration rates of electric vehicles per capita in the world, and my administration is supporting the electrification of the government's fleet of vehicles and providing the enabling environment for the private sector to make the transition. During the past 10 years, the Caribbean has been affected by 40 tropical cyclones, of which 12 attained hurricane strength and 8 were classified as major hurricanes. 6 Caribbean states are ranked in the top 10 most disaster-prone countries in the world, and all are in the top 50, costing this region 2% of our GDP every year. All of the progress made by the world's most vulnerable towards our climate and sustainable development goals is now threatened by the climate crisis, combined with the public health threat of this COVID-19 pandemic, and indeed the resultant severe global economic downturn that is now following. Small open economies, which are tourism dependent like mine, have been devastated. We are simply too dependent on travel. Compulsory expenditure on COVID has consumed the financing intended for climate adaptation and mitigation. We've had literally to spend the money where it was most needed. And in spite of that, we are still in the middle of the hurricane season, as you can hear from the rain behind me in this recording, in the middle of a thunderstorm as I speak to you this morning. Global greenhouse gas emissions have continued to rise and are now 43% higher than they were in 2000. This summer, it was the hottest ever recorded in the northern and southern hemispheres. Climate change negotiations in 2020 have stalled due to the COVID-19 travel protocols. This is the year that both developed and developing countries were to signal a much-needed increase in mitigation ambition in their revised nationally determined contributions. 2020 was also the year when the climate finance goal of $100 billion per year was to be reviewed. The political momentum from Paris 5 years ago is in danger, my friends, of completely dissipating. The USA will formally withdraw from the Paris Agreement next month, and in the middle of a monumental global health crisis, has announced it will sever its relationship with the World Health Organization. This means that we need to be vigilant and we need to take note of the significance of this leaders' event for the Climate Vulnerable Forum. The peril of the day compels the voices of the most vulnerable to rise again. The danger of the time requires us all to recommit to multilateralism. The urgency of the moment necessitates us to use the strength of our numbers. And that strength ought first to be used with the establishment of a universal vulnerability index that better captures our ability to absorb shocks and to respond. The 48 members of the Climate Vulnerable Forum must seize this opportunity as well to call for an immediate injection of liquidity into the most vulnerable economies, along with debt restructuring and forgiveness, particularly for COVID-related debt, ensuring that we can refinance it into long-term instruments, as was done with the British war bonds, in order to be able to allow us to better afford what we can do there. We must demand and seek to engineer a global response at a scale and level commensurate with the immediate challenges faced by low and middle-income developing countries. We have to rely on each other. Madam Chair, the stakes have never been higher. Our lives and our livelihoods are at risk now more than ever. Barbados' mantra over the last unprecedented 6 months of this pandemic has been simple. There shall be no retreat. There shall be no surrender. I call upon the leaders of this forum to take up this call in both the fight against climate and the fight against the COVID pandemic. For together we shall make it. For together we can overcome both the climate crisis and the pandemic in the name not just of our countries, but more importantly, of our people. I thank you and wish you all the very best.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister, for your strong words calling for scale and speed on climate adaptation and climate action more broadly. Let me now turn to Cambodia and after that to Fiji. Prime Minister Hun Sen, we're very happy that you were able to join us live today. You're in the heart of one of the most vulnerable regions of the planet. Thank you for sharing with us Cambodia's vision with our forum live here today. The floor is yours, sir.
Hasina, Excellencies, Madam, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I'm delighted to join this important climate vulnerable forum via online video conference. The year 2020 is a difficult period for socio-economic development as COVID-19 pandemic has caused devastating effect on the economy and society, as well as creating uncertainties on the development for both now and in the future. Certainly, similar to COVID-19, climate change is another worrying problem that would render severe and unpredictable consequences on societies, economies, and security in the region and the world. In recent years, series of disasters worldwide have become more severe and intense than we have ever experienced before. In this context, although we need to shift policies and resource priority to combat the COVID-19, we should all work hard to prioritize and ensure continuities of the implementation of climate change mitigation measures, which is a core agenda for our sustainable socio-economic development. Excellencies, Madam, ladies and gentlemen, Cambodia is a small country with limited resources, but we have strived to fulfill our obligation as stated in COP21. That is, we have taken climate change mitigation as an important component of the national development policies. At the same time, the legal, institutional, and technical frameworks for the program on reducing emission from deforestation and forest degradation plus is on a rapid track and is expected to be fulfilled completely by the end of the year. We have also actively involved in global climate change response efforts by updating nationally determined contribution update, which will be submitted to the UNFCCC Secretariat at the end of the year. Although Cambodia has less greenhouse gas emission, we would like to demonstrate our commitment to combat climate change according to our capacities and available resources. At the global level, I'm of the view that climate change is a cross-cutting issue that needs to be addressed through a comprehensive policies with the balance on social, economic, and environmental aspect. At the same time, I would like to encourage all countries to finalize and submit their nationally determined contribution report so as to ambitiously address the issues on the climate change. In addition, I believe that we have to expand the financial resources, especially climate change financings for adaptation pledged by developed countries, and the transfers of technologies to developing countries in order to effectively respond to climate change, including mechanisms to manage and promote private investment in research on renewable energies, energy efficiencies, forest conservation, adaptation technologies, infrastructures, etc. Overall, in the present context, advancing and adhering to the regionalism and multilateralism are key principles for addressing emerging challenges in all aspects, especially the challenges caused by climate change. Despite limited resources and capabilities, Cambodia is highly committed with political will to contributing to global efforts in addressing climate change according to key principles of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, especially the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for these extremely clear words and your clear global leadership on this issue. I'm certain that your message is resonating with our group and audience here today. Allow me now to turn to the Pacific once more, to Fiji first, and afterwards to another part of the world, Nepal. Prime Minister Bainimarama of Fiji, you have been at the forefront of global action on climate change for years. You hosted the Fiji COP in 2017. We look forward to learn from your vision on what is needed. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Or as we say in Fiji, I'm thankful to be with you all for this year's Climate Vulnerable Forum. Just last week, I addressed the Global Smart Energy Summit in Australia, where I stressed the need for countries of the world to embrace firm commitments to curb their emissions, particularly those with highly developed economies. I made it clear that these commitments, whether for 2030 or 2050, are not aimless targets. They are life or death deadlines. I admit speaking in such harsh terms is, well, harsh. But for leaders of vulnerable countries, you know more than anyone that the reality we live with day in and day out is much, much harsher. It's our job to speak out. As vulnerable nations with vulnerable economies, we must come together and hold the eye-meeting countries accountable. Heads of countries and corporations alike need to take notice. While we may be vulnerable, we will not sit quietly as they kick the can of accountability to the next generation. China recently announced a net zero target by 2060. Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Facebook recently announced net zero targets of their own, with some even going further by pledging to remove their historical carbon footprint. So for companies and administrations who balk at the idea of putting their commitments in writing, know that those whose lives depend on your actions are watching you. You have no excuse. By making a commitment and putting a plan in writing, the rest of the world can count on your progress. Instead of living in fear, we can have hope for our country's future and the futures of our children and grandchildren. It's like a wedding band. It is a reminder your life is part of something bigger than yourself. So this is the message we must take to the high emitting countries. Commit, commit, commit. Choose what lasting legacy you want to leave. The damage that you've done to the planet or the commitments that will help it heal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Commit, commit, commit. Very powerful message to the international community from Fiji, and so we must. Now I'm pleased to turn to the Prime Minister of Nepal, and after that I will pass over to the Bangladesh Foreign Minister, Dr. Momen, for the introduction of the CVF Ambassador. Prime Minister Sharma Oli, we all know the plight of the Himalaya, and in fact all glacial territories around the world. What's your statement to the world, sir?
Your Excellency Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I begin by congratulating Bangladesh for assuming the chairmanship of the Climate Vulnerable Forum and coordinating this important event. Climate change today poses an existential threat. The best available science tells us that with rising temperature, rising sea levels, and melting glaciers, humanity is on the wrong side of the race against nature. Retreat of the glacial ice due to global warming has negatively impacted the lives and livelihoods of the Himalayan and high mountain civilization, induced disasters in the lowland, and caused rise of the ocean levels. Nepal's snow-fed rivers nourish the basins and ultimately help cleaning of the ocean ecosystems. They serve as a natural climate stabilizer, signifying the organic linkage between mountains and the oceans. It is ironic that the climate vulnerable countries like ours have borne the brunt of inaction of others. The impacts of climate change do not respect political boundaries. Therefore, the vision set by the CVF for increased commitment by all nations to limit the rise of global temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius is now more important than ever. The inception of survival deadline today highlights the urgency of climate action. The large emitters should break their silence and scale up climate ambitions to send a strong signal. This is a time to walk the talk. It is a time to inspire others by example with full and effective implementation of the Paris Agreement. For us, every year counts, and reducing every fraction of a degree in temperature matters. It is a question of survival for the vulnerable country. CVF has always been on a front line with good track record to lead the long-term sustainable solution to climate change. It is important to keep the climate issues at the top of global political agenda as we prepare for COP26 next year. Nepal remains committed to communicate enhanced nationally determined contribution, NDC, by the end of this year. Climate action for the vulnerable countries like us rests in access to climate financing, affordable technology, and implementable adaptation and mitigation program. Excellencies, the COVID-19 crisis has devastated human lives and economies, but the pandemic can be an opportunity for a greener and more sustainable health and economies. The lesson learned can be useful to tackle climate change with the similar sense of urgency and priority at national, regional, and international levels. The need is to tread on the right path. The need is to unite for climate actions, not to pitch politics against climate change. The need is to have a common plan, the plan of sustainable solutions. There is no time to lose. Action must start now, as this is a question of our survival. I thank you.
Excellent statement, of course, from the Prime Minister from Nepal. The time is there to walk the talk indeed, and it's great to have this perspective in our forum today. Honorable Foreign Minister Abdul Momen, I'm now have the honor to turn to you, sir, for the important task of introducing to the international community the 5 extraordinary representatives that the CVF has appointed as thematic ambassador. Minister Momen, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Patrick. Her Excellency Sheikh Hasina, the Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Honorable Heads of State and Government of CVF countries, Honorable Ministers from CVF countries, Honorable CVF thematic ambassadors, Excellencies, distinguished dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Under the leadership of Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, Bangladesh will be the voice of the vulnerable countries and will do its best to promote their interest in the global platform during its presidency. As the current chair of CVF, with the kind suggestions of the Troika countries, the 5 CVF thematic ambassadors have been appointed to mobilize different sectors and stakeholders to achieve a new level of international solidarity in support of the most vulnerable countries and segments of the society. The areas are ambition, culture, finance, parliaments, renewable energy, and vulnerability. Now it is my pleasure to invite His Excellency Muhammad Nasheed, thematic ambassador for the theme ambition. Muhammad Nasheed is the founder president of CVF, former president of Maldives, and currently is the speaker of Maldives. You have the floor, sir. Unmute to see. Unmute. You have to unmute. Your Excellency, you have to unmute. Your Excellency, maybe we can catch him later. The next I have in my list is this ambassador. Now it is my honor to invite Her Excellency, Ms. Lauren Legarda, our thematic ambassador for parliaments and the deputy speaker of the House of Philippines, to take the floor. You have the floor, madam. Ms. Lauren Legarda, you have the floor, madam. Did I? What's happening? দেখেন তো মুভ করতে পারেন কিনা Nasheed কে আবার দিবেন technical problems. There is a problem. Okay, I see Mohammed Nasheed is there, but he cannot speak. We cannot hear or see his picture. Pardon? I can see Mohammed Nasheed and his whole team up there. Okay, should I move? Okay, then I move to the next one. Next one is, now I would like to invite Ms. Saima Wajed Hussain, CBF thematic ambassador for the theme vulnerability. She's a member of expert advisory panel on mental health, the World Health Organization. Saima Wajed Hussain, you have the floor, madam.
Thank you so much, Mr. Oman. It's a real pleasure to be here and an honor to be a part of this event. Very honored to be appointed as CVF's thematic ambassador for vulnerability and help the forum to represent the needs of the most marginalized and vulnerable of the 1.2 billion people who are living in these countries and suffering daily, living on the front line of the global climate crisis. The realities of climate change permeate their lives every single day and in every aspect of their lives within the community. From my perspective, as a mental health expert and disability advocate, I'm especially concerned about the invisible injustice of the impact of mental health on individuals and families that are affected by disasters that are caused due to climate change. For instance, a single extreme cyclone has been shown to increase the prevalence of mental health issues in the general population by 4%, whether they were directly impacted by the cyclone or not. And for those who are additionally vulnerable due to chronic physical or mental health conditions, living in extreme poverty, being dependent on others to help communicate their needs, those who cannot access relief assistance because of challenges in mobility, those who are marginalized because of their gender or sexual preferences, and even those who are marginalized due to their religious and ethnic identities, the stakes are even higher for them. A single natural disaster can tailspin into a situation for which they may never fully recover without the right kind of support mechanisms. We already know that the loss of home and income, loss of community and social support systems, disruption in daily life, and continued insecurity due to unsafe and unsanitary living conditions, as well as the fear for daily needs and an uncertain future, all due to the crisis resulting from climate change, can have a compounding effect on mental health that can continue to remain with the individual even when things get better. More often than not, the greater intensity of the loss and the longer the individuals continue to live with uncertainty and live in fear, and more likely it is that this one experience will lead to a chronic anxiety, depression, or conditions like post-traumatic stress disorders. And if the individuals already has a propensity for a mental health condition or has an underlying mental health condition or a chronic physical condition, a manifestation or increased intensity of this conditions will occur, ultimately preventing the individual from living a full, productive, and balanced life, and becoming dependent on expensive health and social safety net programs, and increasing the economic burdens on countries that can least afford them, those countries that are already economically vulnerable to climate change. Having said all that, I want us to also consider the actual experience of the most vulnerable communities that are part of the CVF. And I want us to acknowledge and value the resiliency, the persistence and immense tenacity with which individuals from these communities continue to bounce back and thrive despite those many challenges they face on a regular basis. The strength these most vulnerable groups demonstrate should be a guide to us, and we, in fact, need to learn from them so that we may plan and prepare for a more resilient and empowered communities that can persevere and overcome hardships. In working to change the conversation on climate vulnerability, we should also open our minds to today's youth and engage in constructive conversations with them for decisions we make, which will ultimately affect them the most. The fresh ideas, new energy, and radical ambition of youth is urgently needed in all conversations on climate change. And programs like the Global Center on Adaptation's Youth Adaptation Network that we most recently launched are an excellent example of how it can be done. Therefore, in order to adequately address the needs of climate vulnerable groups, I would like to suggest that the following agenda items of CVF be given priority: expanding efforts to address health and climate change issues, health both physical and mental, and the impact of climate change, particularly on those with mental health concerns and those with disabilities. Supporting millions of people who are forced to flee their homes and even homelands because of changing climate. Supporting billions of workers who struggle with the rising heat in their workplaces. And protecting the rights of the vulnerable everywhere, including those through the CVF call for the creation of a dedicated UN Special Rapporteur for Climate Change and Human Rights. I hope these suggestions aren't too ambitious, but we have to work together in a way to reduce the vulnerability of those who are in the most tenuous situations. Thank you so much, Excellency.
We are grateful for your particular focus on the youth and the devastating impact of climate change on vulnerable peoples. Now it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Tosi Mapanu, a renowned climate change negotiator and CBF ambassador for renewable energy, to share his thoughts with us. Ambassador Mapanu. Okay, God. Thank you.
Minister Moment. Your Excellency, the heads of state and government of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, Secretary General, honorable ministers, fellow CVF ambassadors, I wish to thank this forum presidency for appointing me as the CVF thematic ambassador for renewable energy. I'm deeply honored, and I look forward to work with the presidency and four members as we accelerate progress towards the CVF's unique 100% renewable energy vision. Efficient use of power and renewable energy brings cost competitiveness and has been an important job creator. There have been record-breaking deflationary prices of renewable energy and storage, but we are not on track to limit warming in line with the Paris goals, and over 350 million people across the CVF countries still lack access to energy. $3 trillion each year are spent on other forms of energy investment than renewables. This is over 20 times the level of support to renewable energy. It is time to make the shift, and I believe that our developing economies are ready and committed to be part of that change. In fact, vulnerable developing countries are already enhancing their Paris agreements NDCs, showing up many advanced developed economies and big polluters who have no excuse but to act this year with the midnight deadline approaching. We must also begin reallocating capital and enable investment in renewable energy. Decisive leadership by countries together through enhancing NDCs by our survival deadline in 2020 is one important step to shift market structures and economies towards a high renewable energy future. I launched the Least Developed Countries Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Initiative for Sustainable Development, and I'm proud to work with the CVF on renewable energy now. Providing international support to buy down the cost of capital is urgently needed to unlock more renewable energy installation projects, given the large proportion of upfront capital needed for renewables compared with the other energy investments. The Vulnerable 20 finance ministers of the CVF have developed a unique initiative called the Accelerated Financing Mechanism, AFM, to scale up blended finance for overcoming high capital costs for renewable energy, and we call for international funding and support to help it succeed. We want a renewable energy system to leverage homegrown power from our domestic renewable energy resources that makes energy affordable to everyone, and so makes energy also universally accessible, reliable, and resilient to disasters. Renewables offer all this, and so we look to robust international partnership to follow through. To advance, the CVF and V20, together with ARENA and SE4All, can continue to build on the Forum Energy Dialogue we initiated to develop a joint work program aimed at accelerating the future renewables market in a way that works for the vulnerable nations. This program could focus on A, knowledge tools to build up the right data, analysis, and sharing best practices, and developing industry expertise. B, capacity which looks at infrastructure, policy and employment issues and technology foundations. C, financing, to crowd in investment and deploy tools such as the accelerated financing mechanism and other financing solutions. I look forward to furthering the CVF renewable energy vision and to championing programs, investments, and collaboration as we strive to build high shares of renewables in the emerging energy systems of all countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Maponu, for drawing our attention to renewable energy, which is another very important issue for climate change. Now I have the honor to invite Her Excellency Ms. Lauren Legarda, our thematic ambassador for parliaments, and she's the Deputy Speaker of the House of Philippines. Will you please take the floor, Madam?
Minister Momen, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, Secretary General, Honorable Ministers, fellow CVF ambassadors, parliamentarians, It is an honor to join you on this momentous occasion. I wish to thank the CVF presidency for appointing me as thematic ambassador for parliaments. Our 48-member-strong forum must forge on with the urgent call to raise the level of climate ambition at the global and the national scale. Episodic climate-induced disasters such as intense typhoons, flooding, and storm surge unfortunately form only one subset of the threats we are all facing. The other subset involves slow onset events that take place without the drama of calamity but will inflict more lasting harm to our economic aspirations. While there is a pandemic on land, there is also an ongoing pandemic underwater in the form of sea level rise, ocean acidification, and coral bleaching. Just 3 months ago, we dealt with 47 coral bleaching reports, covering the entire range of low to severe to extreme bleaching. This is an unfolding tragedy with its vast impact on people's livelihoods, food security, and safety. It is in this context that vulnerable country parliaments must take a far more active role in steering development towards low carbon and sustainable pathways, and in enhancing the adaptive capacities of our communities to the climate crisis. I ask my fellow members of parliament of CVF member countries to work in unison and ensure that, first, we create a driving force for enhanced and coherent climate action in the executive and legislative agenda of our respective governments. As policymakers, we can create an enabling environment for science-based policy planning and risk governance at national and subnational levels. Let us challenge our counterparts in the executive to dramatically raise climate ambition through our nationally determined contributions, or NDC. Let us support the establishment of a global carbon market framework. Hard-fought development gains and productivity will continue to be undermined or even reversed if the 1.5-degree global warming threshold of the Paris Agreement is breached. If countries historically responsible for the climate crisis will not act with urgency, we, climate vulnerable countries, must act in concert to compel them to take responsibility. Second, we must argue for the inclusion of climate and resilient interventions into the COVID-19 economic stimulus package. I urge my fellow parliamentarians to echo our call of the Global Commission on Adaptation for world leaders to align COVID-19 responses with the long-term climate objectives of the Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and the Paris Agreement. Let us turn this recovery into a real opportunity to accelerate progress in 7 areas, namely urban resilience, water resources management, social safety nets, food security, nature-based solutions, disaster risk reduction. Lastly, we must support the Vulnerable 20 group of finance ministers in mobilizing climate finance and de-risking financial flows to our economies. The deployment of financial instruments is our key to unlock a new risk management paradigm that would bring about resilience and stability, especially for small businesses and vulnerable populations. The CVF V20 has recently secured a $3 billion commitment from China to support the adaptation initiatives in renewable energy transition of its member countries. We expect this partnership to prosper with China's enhanced NDC ambition. Excellencies, sustained by the support of my fellow parliamentarians, the CVF will continue to drive transformative global climate action for a safer, more secure, resilient, greener, and more sustainable future for all of us. Thank you. Mabuhay. This has been Lauren de Garca.
Thank you, Excellency Legarda, for your useful observation regarding the role of parliaments to deal with climate change. You will be happy to know that in Bangladesh Parliament, we have passed a resolution on planetary emergency with consensus. Now, I have the privilege to request His Excellency Muhammad Nasheed, our thematic ambassador for the theme ambition, to make his remarks. You have the floor, President Nasheed.
The Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to see the start of the Countdown to Midnight campaign, encouraging countries to submit updated NDCs under the Paris Agreement by the end of this year. We can't let this crucial climate deadline slip because the world is burning. The largest ice shelf in the Atlantic has collapsed. A third of Bangladesh is underwater. There were so many hurricanes in the Atlantic this year, they ran out of names in the alphabet. I want to be clear, we in the CBF have not caused the problem. We heard from Oxfam last month that the top 1% of the world's income earners have produced twice as much carbon emission as the bottom 50% in the past 2 decades. This means the rich have burnt up most of the remaining 1.5-degree carbon budget. We in the CVF, who are mostly poor countries, have done our bit to help simply by remaining poor. But this cannot go on. Bangladesh, Kenya, all the CVF countries who are now LDCs rightly aim to achieve middle income status quickly within the next 2 decades. If this development is done in a high carbon way, it is game over for planet. There will be no ice left in the Atlantic at all, in the Arctic at all. And my own country, the Maldives, will disappear. We have to figure out a way through this conundrum, and to that, I am appealing to CVF member countries to work with me and a team of world-class experts to draw up what the Bangladesh government has called climate prosperity plans. Thank you, Prime Minister. These plans will aim to deliver the economic growth and prosperity that CVF countries rightfully demand, to eliminate poverty entirely and allow today's LDCs to reach middle income status by 2035-2040. In summary, we do not want eco-austerity, we want eco-prosperity. If we can get this effort underway quickly enough, these climate prosperity plans can feed into the NDC process. I expect the commitments to be conditional. However, on the raising of sufficient finance and technology transfer, I am not talking about aid. But even private sector capital needs credit guarantees and insurance. And our technology has to keep on improving. We are the carbon neutral aircraft. In the Maldives, we still burn diesel in our boats between islands. How can we replace it? How can we get hydrogen from solar PV on a large enough scale? And so on and so forth. All these tech developments need to include CVF countries. So we also propose setting up technology hubs based in CVF countries. These hubs will be centers of excellence in technology that can be utilized by all. We want each of these hubs to be delivered tech that can reduce emission by gigatons by the end of the decade. We in the CVF may be climate vulnerable, but we are not victims. We are the leaders. As Ambition Ambassador, it is my job for the CVF to take our high ambition plans, our climate prosperity plans, to form the nucleus of a high ambitious coalition that also includes the biggest and most powerful nations. This is a new paradigm for climate. Instead of I want because you want, we have I will because you will. Instead of the blame game, we have the aim game. Let's aim for high ambition, zero carbon, go back to 1.5 degrees and save the planet. Thank you.
Your Excellency Mohammed Nasheed, for your call specially for enhancement of NDCs by all of us. Now I have the privilege to invite Her Excellency Miss Katie Jetnil Kiziner, a famous poet and educator, and the CVF ambassador, thematic ambassador for culture. You have the floor, Miss Jetnil Kiziner.
Happy to be here today as well as culture plays an important role. I look forward to all of these our countdowns. I accepted the role of culture ambassador because of my passion for the arts, but also because of our long relationship with CVF. RMI has chaired the CVF before Bangladesh, and in our role as chair, we hosted the first virtual conference for COVID-19. Before this, these Zoom calls and these video messages became the norm. The Marshall Islands, even with our limited capacity and access to Wi-Fi, we were able to demonstrate creative, emissions-cutting solutions to combating COVID. In this era of COVID, it's become a daily norm. RMI proud to lead the way first. So COVID shows us that we are capable of making the to adapt and protect our communities. It's also exposed the cracks and the ways in which our struggles are interconnected. And as we continue to work for and advocate, I hope we remember that creativity should be the key and the heart of how we move forward. This is a structural intersectional issue that requires out-of-the-box thinking. Cultural creators have the capability to communicate this threat, to engage our deepest emotions, and to shift consciousness towards a systemic change. As culture ambassador, I look forward to advocating for the power of culture as a means to tackle. We'll be promoting transnational artistic collaborations on climate issues involving different CVF members and commencing with the launch of the Agam Poetry Collective book in 2020, amongst other projects. In the Marshall Islands, a cultural practice that we have is to celebrate our birthdays midnight. I have memories of waking up bleary-eyed, my 90-year-old grandmother clapping and singing. I look forward to celebrating the countries that will bring their NDCs forward at midnight, celebrating the birth of a new era. Thank you.
Jetnil Kizina for highlighting the cultural aspect of the huge cost of climate change. With her, we come to the close of the interventions by our distinguished thematic ambassadors. Now I'll get back to Patrick in the Netherlands. You have the floor, Patrick.
Well, thank you so much, Minister Momen, for this very important section indeed. Exciting times ahead with such great ambassadors taking forward the causes of the vulnerable nations. In particular, I would like to thank Ms. Saima, who also referenced earlier today her great leadership on launching the Youth Adaptation Network and her message that we have a lot to learn from the vulnerable people on the front lines. And indeed, the GCA itself is very proud to also be working so closely with your presidency's special envoy, Mr. Azad, who has been an extraordinary driving force of this initiative so far. And lastly, I want to just do a quick shout out to Salim Hook, who has been extraordinarily influential in articulating the importance of locally led action. Let us now return to the remaining leaders and ministers from the CVF and our partners. I'm extremely pleased to be able now to introduce Vice President Al Gore, after which I will call upon Bhutan. Mr. Vice President Gore, you awoke the world to the climate crisis over a decade ago. You were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007, together with the IPCC. What is your message, Mr. Vice President, to this forum, and what's the role of the US in all of this?
And thank you, Mr. Secretary General, Prime Ministers, Your Excellencies. Thank you all for inviting me to this crucially important event. And thank you especially to the Climate Vulnerable Forum members and the Global Center on Adaptation for their leadership in organizing this. Today, billions of people around the world are living in the areas most vulnerable to the impacts of the climate crisis. Many face an uncertain and dangerous present, as well as an even more threatened future. The impacts and consequences for humanity, dumping 152 million tons of global warming pollution into the atmosphere every single day. Those consequences are here right now. And the consequences are increasingly affecting our lives today. For example, in Bangladesh, tens of millions of people are at risk from sea level rise, and that nation continues to be battered by ever more powerful cyclones year after year, including, of course, this year. Just 2 short months ago, over 1/4 of the entire country of Bangladesh was underwater due to heavy flooding. In the past year, we've seen similar catastrophic events in Afghanistan, the Philippines, South Sudan, Yemen, and elsewhere. As many countries have set all-time high temperature records this year, 2 of the members of the CVF, Ghana and Lebanon, are among them. And even in my own country, record-setting forest fires rage on the West Coast, while multiple hurricanes have been bearing down on the Gulf Coast. It's clear that the climate crisis is indeed an existential threat and that every nation must treat it as such. While these impacts continue to worsen, I also believe we are at a tipping point, a political tipping point, where the solutions to the climate crisis are concerned. And I'm so encouraged by the progress we can continue to make, the progress we have to make, the progress we will make. That progress starts with not just updating the nationally determined contributions from the world's countries under the Paris Agreement, but enhancing the commitments that are built on the foundation of science and are communicated before the end of this year. Coal-fired power plants that would become stranded assets must not be built, pure and simple. Renewable energy must be used instead to meet the growing energy demand and rising standards of living. Forests and other natural landscapes must be preserved to maintain and sequester carbon and also to protect vital biodiversity and to prevent disease. Wealthier countries must live up to the promises that they have made for financial support as vulnerable nations make efforts toward adaptation and clean energy transition. We have the moral obligation to do these things and to do them with urgency. And we will continue to make progress, whether at the federal level or through leadership from subnational and regional governments, local governments, businesses, and investors. Over the past few years, all of these entities have been stepping up to say we are still in the Paris Agreement. Make no mistake, the American people are still committed to the Paris Agreement, committed to leading the world in solving the climate crisis. When these steps, among others that are taken, we will not only be safer from the impacts of the climate crisis, we will also improve the global economy, create more jobs and more equality of incomes and net worths. We will enhance global security. We will have moved the moral compass toward a more just, fair, and sustainable world. So once again, thank you to the Climate Vulnerable Forum for hosting this event. Please keep up the great work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vice President Gore. Very important takeaways. Climate crisis has led to a tipping point, including politically. We all have a moral obligation to act with urgency. And if we do so, we will all thrive. What a message for our meeting today. We thank you. I'm now very excited to move on to our next speakers. Let's first turn to Bhutan, followed by the Gambia. Your Excellency, Minister Penjor, Minister for Agriculture and Forest of Bhutan. Thank you for joining us live today. I hope your connection is working. Let me waste no time in giving you the floor. Mr. Minister, over to you.
Madam Chair, Her Excellency Sheikh Hasina, Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Honorable Heads of State and Governments, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, fellow ministers, excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning, afternoon, and evening to all. I bring warm regards from the Prime Minister of Bhutan, His Excellency Dr. Lote Sring, who could not be present in the forum due to his pressing domestic engagements. On behalf of the Royal Government of Bhutan, I would like to extend our warm felicitations to the government of the People's Republic of Bangladesh for taking over the presidency of the Climate Vulnerable Forum and the Vulnerable 20 Group of Ministers of Finance for the 2020 to 2022 term. The Royal Government of Bhutan extends its full support and cooperation and looks forward to your leadership. Bhutan also wish to thank the government of the Republic of Marshall Islands for your leadership and steering the forum to greater heights. Representing the government of Bhutan, I join Madam Chair and my fellow CVF member countries in calling for enhanced global efforts to tackle the climate crisis. The most vulnerable countries, despite contributing the least to climate change, are the hardest hit by its impacts. Despite being a carbon negative country, Bhutan is not spared from the impacts of climate change. Cloudbursts triggering flash floods is becoming common and frequent, hampering road infrastructures, agriculture fields, and risking human life and settlements. Adaptation is a priority for CVF members. Global community must support vulnerable societies. Notwithstanding the economic challenges, we have committed to remain carbon neutral. Our constitution mandates forest cover of 60%, while the present forest coverage is over 70%. Our energy needs are net from hydropower, which is renewable energy, and we export close to 8% of the production. This export of clean energy is offsetting GHG emissions in neighboring countries like India. Environmental conservation is at the core of our developmental philosophy of cross-national happiness aimed at ensuring sustainable and equitable socio-economic development for the well-being of our citizens. The COVID-19 pandemic has presented greater challenges towards addressing the climate change. The reversal of global economic growth has increased the need for ensuring access to food and the other basic facilities as we continue to deal with multiple shocks from both the COVID-19 pandemic and climate-related impacts. The world must come together to get on track to achieve the global goal of limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius as set out in the Paris Agreement. The science is robust and clear. It tells us that limiting global warming to below 1.5 degrees Celsius is achievable. What is needed is political will to deliver climate ambition and action in line with the 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway. Every action counts, and every fraction of a degree in temperature increase matters. It is a matter of survival for the millions of people in poor and vulnerable countries such as ours. Therefore, we call for the highest political engagement to ensure the submission of their countries' new and enhanced NDCs this year. We also expect countries to propose visionary long-term strategies for achieving low-carbon, climate-resilient development by mid-century. The COVID-19 pandemic provides a window of opportunity for transformative green recoveries to build back better, to deliver stronger climate, sustainability, health, and economic outcomes. We support the call by the Secretary General for a green recovery to the pandemic and his 6 climate positive actions, and urge all countries to use climate action on the basis for their pandemic recovery efforts and enhance NDCs. This is the only pathway that will deliver significant to low greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2050. Climate vulnerability for CVF member countries means risking livelihood. Some risk going underwater and some risks going without water. In conclusion, I wish to thank the government of the People's Republic of Bangladesh the kind invitation that they have extended to Bhutan and wish a very successful deliberation and the outcome of the forum. Thank you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister, for your very bold statement. As you indicated, political leadership matters, and we need all to chip in to really demonstrate the direction of travel for the world. Let me now first invite the Gambia, followed by Ghana. Your Excellency Lamin Diba, you are the Minister of Environment and Climate Change of the Republic of Gambia. Minister, we look forward to your statement joining us live today. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you.
There might be some sound issue, Mr. Minister. I suspect that's a connectivity issue. Let's see whether we can resolve it in real time. No, I think we have some difficulties here. Mr. Minister, it's very difficult to hear you, I'm afraid. Let's give it one more try, and otherwise we'll return to you at a later stage if that's acceptable to you. Sir, is there any way you can hear me? I'm terribly sorry. It's very difficult to hear you. We know you have a very important message to share, obviously, and we want to give you due credit indeed to deliver that message in full. There is a technical issue here. I mean, that's the reality of our virtual world. We all experience this every now and then. I think there's... I'm inclined... Mr. Minister, can you hear me? I'm inclined to...
Important.
I'm inclined, looking also at the host government, to turn briefly to Ghana first, and let's see whether we can re-establish a proper connection with the Gambia. And deeply apologies, Mr. Minister.
Hello.
For this. But let us try to turn to Ghana.
Hello.
I'm lost. This is interesting, but what I suggest, let us try to go to Ghana. We have with us Dr. Henry Kukofu, head of the EPA. We please you've been with us live also in this case from Accra. Let us see whether the connection is slightly better than we just heard from the Gambia. Let us give it a try. If those who don't speak, we're not called up to speak, if we can put ourselves on mute, that definitely will help, I'm sure. Let us go to Ghana first, and then we may again the Gambia. Might be Murphy's Law. I see that Simon Steele is already sitting sharply in Grenada, ready for his remarks. Why don't we just leave Africa for a minute, come back to the continent, of course, but let's turn to Simon Steele. Simon, you're the Minister of Environment in Grenada. You're a global leader on building back better. Your Prime Minister is very active in this domain. You're a CVF member.
Yes,
Please, the floor is yours. Simon. Simon, you're on mute. I mean, that might be, yeah.
Thank you very much, Patrick. On behalf of the government and people of Grenada, I wish to congratulate the Climate Vulnerable Forum and the Global Center on Adaptation for convening this virtual leaders event today and its focus on the climate survival of vulnerable states. Global response to the climate crisis is already inadequate, with a call for additional resources to fight the COVID pandemic compounding our challenges. However, 2020 has opened up an opportunity for all of us to make the changes that are required to tackle climate change by incorporating climate action into the recovery plans for COVID-19 that we're all working on. There appears to be an international consensus.
Simon, if I can just ask upon all colleagues, ministers, officers to put their lines on mute, otherwise it's get a sort of a cacophony of noise. And I think Simon has a very important message to share. Simon, can we go back to you? Apologies for disrupting your flow of your speech. Apologies.
No problem at all. So the global response to the climate crisis is already inadequate, with a call for additional resources to fight the COVID pandemic, compounding our challenges. However, 2020 has opened up an opportunity for all of us to make the changes that are required to tackle climate change by incorporating climate action into the recovery plans for COVID-19 that we are all already working on. There appears to be international consensus, with all development agencies now aligned in their thinking with regard to the way forward. Whether that's a green recovery, a blue recovery, building back better, building cleaner, or building forward. All the right words are there. The question is, will we? This convergence in thinking coincides with the timing of our obligations to enhance our national determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. Together, this has created a massive opportunity for developing more ambitious NDCs, using these NDCs as a cornerstone for our national plans in a way that would have been more difficult to achieve under a pre-COVID business as usual scenario. But are we taking full advantage of this opportunity, or are we squandering it? The data tells us the jury is still out, with less than half of the monies pledged under these recovery plans targeting climate